Hello everyone, I'm Toby Ord and I'm a junior research fellow at Balliol College and a philosopher here at Oxford, so part of the Department of Philosophy. And I'm going to talk to you, well, the title of the talk is Shared Treasures, the True Value of Time and Money. And you may have heard a little bit about that I've done some charitable work recently, and this is going to connect with that. And also give you a little bit of moral philosophy on the topic. So what I've done in general, I think, is trying to put some of my academic ideas and the academic ideas of others into practice in ethics. There's often a bit of a disconnect in ethics between the theory and the practice. So I've been trying to remedy that to some degree. So the talk, I want you to think on a big picture scale. And we're going to be talking about scale a bit. This is an artwork called $1 billion, if you ever want to know what that looks like. And this is a whole lot of Rolex time sand. It's enough for a human life worth of sand in an hourglass. To give you some kind of a feeling of scale. But now into some more serious things. So let's just talk very briefly about the value of money. And this probably won't come as much of a surprise to you, the things I'm going to say at first. So money is relatively simple to value. The value of money is to do with what it can get us. We don't care about money intrinsically. We just care about what we can get with it. And we call this instrumental value. And more accurately, it's the value of the best thing that you can get with it. It doesn't matter if you can get something very bad with it. All you care about is the best deal that you can get. Now, the value of time is a bit more complicated. It has two parts to it. Sometimes it's like money, and we use it to get things that we want, or to get money to get these things. So we could use the time to earn some money to buy something. And this is another case of instrumental value. But as well as that, it can be different. We can have cases where time itself is what we want, or more accurately, it's not just the time, it's the time spent doing something that we like is what's of value. So that's, again, a pretty obvious idea, just to situate things. And we call this intrinsic value. So unlike money, time can sometimes be intrinsically valuable, and sometimes it can be instrumentally valuable. So if we're thinking about the value of time, it's the value of the best thing it can be used for, taking both of these ways into account. So for example, if you have an hour to spend and you could use it to make a cake, or to make money to buy a cake, or to use it to talk to your friends. So these are some of your possibilities, and you just think about which of those ones is ultimately the best for you, and that's the value of your time. Okay, so that's just the concepts of how you think about these things. But let's have a look at how valuable they are using this basic idea. So what I said was that you use it to get things which are of ultimate intrinsic value. So what kinds of things could these be? And moral philosophers talk about this quite a lot. This is a standard topic of conversation in the journals. So it could be physical objects being of ultimate value. I don't think that's all that plausible, but it could be experiences that you have. It could be happiness. So it might be that you can reduce all experiences down to happiness, perhaps. It might be education might be of intrinsic value. Of course, if something like education is of intrinsic value, it won't be the only thing. It might be education's of value and happiness is also of value, and so forth. Perhaps health is of intrinsic value, or at least it's certainly of some value in as much as it contributes to happiness and other parts of our life. What we're going to look at here to focus on, because you can get the most interesting results, is to look at the value of health. So we'll look at that as a special example, and I'll show you how valuable time and money are in this respect. So the value of money in terms of health is what we're going to look at first. So this might seem a little bit dry, but you'll see where it's going soon enough. So how do you measure the value of health? So we could think about our own health, but I want you to think bigger than that, and to think about the health of many people. If you look at the NHS, they try to work out how they can spend their budget to help people the most in terms of their health. This obviously makes sense, and the idea there is to buy the most health for the least money, Or perhaps more accurately, they've got a fixed amount of money that they're given by the government, and they want to get the most health for that amount of money. The most improvement in health, you might say. So this would give us the value of money in terms of health. So how much health can we buy with our money? And you might just wonder how on earth you're going to do that. It sounds like a very difficult question, and indeed it is a very difficult question. But there's a basic methodology that they use. So the first type of question you might think of is how many lives can you save with money to try to work out how valuable it is. This is an interesting question, but it is not the best way to deal with it. So there's this truism in public health that no one has ever saved a life. You might think you saved someone's life, but what you do is you stop them dying now, but they still die later. There's this problem, unless you make someone immortal, that you don't ultimately save their life. And it seems to matter, though, how many extra years of life you give them. So if you ran into the middle of the road to save someone from being hit by a truck and pushed them to the other side of the road where they got hit by a bus 5 seconds later, in some sense you saved their life, but it seems a bit trivial and not worth that much. Therefore you're thinking, well, okay, we need to take into account the amount of time that you give someone. It seems to be an important way to move on there. So we can extend lives, and we could think about how many life years we can save. So this is a decent approach, but then you might think, well, hang on, there's more to health than this. There's also the quality of the life. So it might be the case that someone's considering an aggressive chemotherapy for cancer, and they think, well, this is going to extend my life probably, but at a lower quality of life because it will be so difficult and painful. So there are trade-offs between quantity and quality of life like that doctors need to think about. And there are also cases where we care about just improving the quality of someone's life in general. So if I have a really bad toothache and I want to go to the dentist, then that's something as additive value to me if I have this toothache fixed, even though it might not be extending my life. So we want to think about quality of life as well as extension of life. It's pretty obvious stuff. Now, when we think about this, we think, well, maybe we can combine these two together. And indeed, that's what they do. They use this approach, and they talk about quality-adjusted life years. So the idea there, well, we'll come to it in a second. They call quality-adjusted life year, turns into this acronym QALY. So it takes into account quality and quantity, and the standard approach in public health. And here's how it works. Sometimes it's presented very complexly, but actually it's a very simple idea. Imagine this is someone's life, and we think about it. We've got time going across the horizontal axis here, and so let's suppose that the quality of their health goes like this over their life. There's a dip in the middle where they get quite sick, and then rather rapidly, and then more slowly they recover from that illness. And then there's a slower decline, and then a very rapid decline at the end of the life, just after 70 years in this case. So what you could do is you could think about, what about that area under the graph? If we improve someone's quality of life, it increases this area under the graph. And if we improve the length of their life, that also increases this area. This seems to perhaps be what we're interested in. And that's the approach that health economists use. So to simplify matters, we'll use some rectangles here. So you could say, what about if we improved the quality of life like this, or if we improved the quantity of life there? And then you could work out these quality-adjusted life years by just multiplying these things together. So 60 years of life improved by 20% quality is equal to 12 of these quality-adjusted life years. So you just multiply the things together. It's a pretty simple concept. You don't need to pay attention to those numbers either. It's not very relevant. I was just trying to give you an example as to you and say, how do you know which of these is a better improvement? Now, obviously, it's very difficult to use this method in some cases because you think, well, for a certain illness, how do we set the quality weightings? How do we know how bad it is to have a certain condition? And what they do is they ask a lot of questions of people, both with and without these conditions, and they ask them how much they're willing to trade off. So if they find someone who is blind and they want to know how difficult it is to be blind and how important it is to cure people who are blind, how much health gain would be made by this, then they ask them, would you prefer to live for 5 years of life with sight or 10 years of life blind? And let's suppose they say 10 years of life blind is better. And then they say, well, what about 9 years with, and with sight versus 10 years blind? And they keep asking them these different questions to elicit answers to how they would trade off quality versus quantity of life. And they use this to work out quality weights. And it's not perfect, it's not a precision thing, but the rough idea is that you'll get it somewhat right. Maybe you'll come up with 70% and 80% would have been a better answer, but at least you're somewhere in the ballpark of the correct answers. And that's all we'll need for the talk today, so you don't need to worry too much about the precise details of it. So what is one of these quality-adjusted life years, this measurement of health? What is it worth? So we can look at how much the NHS is prepared to spend for one of these, and they're prepared to spend at least £20,000 per QALY. So the idea is that if a new treatment comes on the market and the treatment will cost less than £20,000 per QALY, then they fund it. If it will cost more than £30,000, the rule is supposed to be that they don't fund it. And if it costs somewhere in between, then they look at the details of the case. They look at extra benefits it will have, whether it's for a disadvantaged group, and questions like this, to try to sort out the rough cases. But the basic idea is they're prepared to spend certainly at least £20,000. Sometimes they'll spend more. Now, there are 8,760 hours in a year. So this comes to about £2.30 per hour, which is an interesting way to think about it. So one question is, how much would you spend in order to work out how much something's worth? If you're prepared to spend at least a certain amount, then it's worth more than that to you. So how much would you spend for a year of healthy life? It's a bit difficult to answer that, I think, if you're thinking of lumps of £20,000, particularly if you don't have a spare £20,000 floating around. So here are a couple of ways to think about it, though. It's pretty good compared to an hour at the cinema. If you spend £2.30 for an hour of healthy life, I mean, that's cheaper than a cinema ticket, and it's also, you might think that that's better. I mean, cinema upgrades an hour or so of life into a particularly fun experience, and maybe it improves some of your life later by reflecting upon it. But this looks pretty good to me. Now, another way to think about it is, suppose you could have a salary of £20,000, or you could have, for your life, or you could have a salary of £30,000 but be blind. Which one of those would you prefer? And I think I value my sight quite a lot, and I think it'd be quite difficult being blind, so I would prefer the £20,000 salary. So if you would prefer the £20,000 salary, it turns out that means that you value a QALY at least £20,000 per year because of the weightings they use for blindness is about a half. So that's another way to think about it. Okay, so probably a lot of you think that, yeah, £2.30 per hour of health is a pretty good deal, and that it is worth at least that much, that the NHS isn't spending too much on this, that if anything, maybe they should be increasing their price for it because it seems to be a pretty good deal at that price, and maybe it's a good deal at a higher price as well. Maybe it's worth £6 an hour or more. So then we can ask this question, what does a QALY cost? So I said that when they're thinking about additional treatment in the NHS, it's about £20,000 is the question, the point that they look at. But can you get a QALY cheaper than that, a year of life at full health equivalent, cheaper than £20,000? Well, yes, you can, and it's not that surprising. If you look in other countries, you can get it cheaper. So in the UK, you can actually get some health very, very cheap, but we already do that. So all of that health is bought. So the NHS, there are some very cheap treatments that they have for various illnesses, and they're always provided. If we added more money to funding the NHS, we wouldn't get more of those treatments because those are the most obvious no-brainer decisions to make. But there are many countries where those things still haven't happened due to lack of financing in particular, and sometimes also due to a lack of priority setting. They're not quite sure what the most cost-effective things are.